Sometimes the smallest choice changes an entire kingdom. Snow fell heavily across the northern forest as icy winds swept between towering pine trees. Most people had already returned home before the storm grew worse. Emily Carter had not been so lucky. The young Omega adjusted the worn cloak around her shoulders and continued walking through the deep snow. Her basket was nearly empty now. The herbs she collected earlier had already been delivered to an elderly healer in a nearby village. The extra money would help pay for firewood this winter. It was not much, but Emily had long ago learned how to survive on very little. The path ahead was nearly invisible beneath fresh snow. Every step sank several inches into the frozen ground. Most members of the pack rarely noticed her. Some barely remembered her name. She was simply another Omega living on the edge of society. Quiet, invisible, easily overlooked. Emily never complained about it. Complaining never changed anything. She preferred focusing on small acts of kindness instead. Helping neighbors, delivering medicine, gathering herbs for those who could not leave their homes. None of it made her important, but it helped people. That was enough. A sudden flash of silver caught her attention. Emily stopped walking. Something shimmered beneath a nearby snowdrift. Curious, she stepped closer and carefully brushed away the snow with her gloved hand. Her breath caught instantly. Resting beneath the ice was an extraordinary pendant. The chain appeared handcrafted from silver. Intricate symbols decorated its surface. At the center sat a polished blue gemstone that reflected light even beneath the gray winter sky. Emily had never seen anything so beautiful. She looked around instinctively. The forest remained empty. No footprints. No travelers. No signs that anyone had recently passed through. Whoever lost the pendant was long gone. Emily carefully lifted it from the snow. The metal felt surprisingly warm despite the freezing weather. Strange. She turned the pendant over. On the back was a royal crest. Even beneath years of wear, the symbol remained recognizable. Emily frowned. The crest belonged to the Blackthorn royal family. Her eyes widened slightly. This was no ordinary piece of jewelry. Someone important had owned it. Very important. She slipped the pendant into her pocket for safekeeping. Tomorrow she would ask around the villages. Perhaps someone knew who lost it. The decision felt simple. Obvious, even. The pendant belonged to someone. Therefore it should be returned. Emily resumed walking. She never noticed the pair of distant eyes watching from between the trees. High upon a rocky ridge overlooking the forest stood Alpha King Ethan Blackthorn. Snow covered his dark coat as he stared toward the place where Emily had found the pendant. Several royal guards searched nearby with lanterns. Their expressions grew more frustrated by the hour. The Alpha King barely heard them. His attention remained fixed on the empty patch of snow below. The pendant was gone. For 3 days the royal household had searched every road, trail, and forest path. Nothing. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. That pendant was the last gift his mother had ever given him. The final connection to the woman who taught him kindness before her passing many years ago. No treasure in the kingdom mattered more. A guard approached carefully. "Your Majesty, darkness is coming. We should return." Ethan nodded slowly. Yet as he glanced one final time toward the distant forest path, an unfamiliar feeling settled over him. Somewhere beyond the storm, fate had already placed the pendant into the hands of a girl the entire pack had forgotten to notice. The next morning, the entire pack seemed to be talking about only one thing. Emily noticed the change immediately. As she walked through the marketplace carrying a basket of herbs, conversations stopped whenever she passed. Groups gathered around notice boards. Merchants whispered to customers. Even children ran through the streets repeating rumors they barely understood. Curious, Emily approached the central square. A large crowd had gathered beneath the official pack announcements. She waited patiently until enough people moved aside for her to see. Her eyes widened. A royal proclamation hung at the center of the board. The missing pendant. Below the description was a reward so large that Emily almost thought she had read it incorrectly. The amount could buy a comfortable home. It could pay for years of food and supplies. It could completely transform the life of someone like her. Around her, excitement filled the air. Everyone is searching for it. I heard the Alpha King doubled the reward yesterday. Some hunters have been combing the forest for days. Emily read the notice again. The description matched the pendant perfectly. She slowly touched the pocket of her cloak where it rested safely. A strange feeling settled inside her. The pendant was worth far more than she ever imagined. For a brief moment, Temptation appeared. The reward could solve so many problems. Her roof needed repairs before spring. The healers still deserved payment for several medicines Emily had accepted on credit. There were elderly villagers she could help, families struggling through winter. The possibilities seemed endless. Yet none of those thoughts lasted very long. The pendant still belonged to someone else. That fact never changed. Emily quietly stepped away from the crowd and continued toward the healer's cottage. Throughout the day, the topic followed her everywhere. Villagers discussed search parties. Travelers exchanged theories. Some claimed the pendant contained ancient magic. Others insisted it symbolized royal authority. By evening, the story had grown larger than the truth itself. Emily sat beside a small fireplace in her cottage, turning the pendant gently between her fingers. The blue gemstone reflected the dancing firelight. Up close, the craftsmanship appeared even more extraordinary. Whoever created it had poured remarkable care into every detail. She wondered briefly what kind of person had treasured it enough to launch a kingdom-wide search. Far away in Blackthorn Palace, Ethan Blackthorn stood inside a council chamber while advisors delivered disappointing reports. Search teams returned empty-handed. Hunters discovered nothing. Merchants offered no useful information. Every hour seemed to push the pendant farther beyond reach. Ethan listened in silence. Finally, one advisor cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider the possibility that whoever found it intends to keep it." The words lingered in the room. Ethan stared out a nearby window toward the snowy kingdom beyond. Most people would have sold the pendant already. Most people would have seen only its value. Yet something told him otherwise. Something he could not explain. "Continue searching," he said quietly. "Someone found it." His silver eyes narrowed slightly. "I do not believe they found it for themselves." The advisors exchanged uncertain glances. Meanwhile, miles away, Emily carefully wrapped the pendant inside a clean cloth. Tomorrow she would travel to Blackthorn Palace and return it personally. She expected a simple exchange. A quick thank you. Then she would return home and continue her ordinary life. She had no way of knowing that one decision would soon place her directly in the path of the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. The journey to Blackthorn Palace began before sunrise. Frost covered the fields surrounding Emily Carter's small cottage as she stepped onto the quiet road with the wrapped pendant secured safely inside her satchel. The sky glowed pale blue above distant mountains, and cold air filled her lungs with every breath. She expected the trip to take most of the day. The palace stood nearly 20 miles away, overlooking the capital from a hill crowned with towers and stone walls. Emily had only seen it from a distance before. Like most ordinary Omegas, she had little reason to visit the center of power. Along the road, she passed dozens of people traveling in the opposite direction. Hunters carried supplies. Merchants guided wagons. Even members of neighboring packs seemed unusually busy. Almost all of them were talking about the reward. Some boasted about where they searched. Others argued over rumors surrounding the missing pendant. Emily remained quiet. The secret rested only a few inches from her heart. By late afternoon, the palace finally appeared above the horizon. Sunlight reflected from tall windows and silver banners fluttered in the winter breeze. Even after years of seeing sketches and paintings, the sight stole her breath. Blackthorn Palace looked less like a building and more like something from a story. Massive stone gates guarded the entrance. Courtyards stretched beyond them. Guards in royal uniforms stood watch along every wall. Emily slowed slightly as nervousness crept into her thoughts. Returning the pendant suddenly felt much more complicated than it had that morning. Still, she continued forward. She had come too far to turn back now. Near the entrance, a line of visitors waited to enter the palace grounds. Nobles, merchants, officials, and travelers moved steadily through security inspections. Emily joined the line and waited patiently. Some people glanced at her simple clothing and immediately looked away. She was used to that. When her turn finally arrived, a palace guard examined her identification papers. His eyes briefly narrowed. "Purpose of visit?" Emily hesitated. "I believe I found something that belongs to the Alpha King." The guard blinked. Then he laughed. A second guard overheard and smirked. "Another one?" the second man asked. Emily frowned slightly. "Another what?" "Another person claiming to have the pendant." The first guard shook his head. "You are the fifth today." Several nearby visitors chuckled. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am not claiming anything. I only want to return it." The guard sighed and gestured toward a side entrance. Fine. Someone from the royal office can deal with it. Moments later, Emily found herself inside a waiting chamber filled with other hopeful visitors. Some carried trinkets. Others held jewelry, old coins, or family heirlooms they insisted might be connected to the reward. Most appeared far more confident than she did. One wealthy noblewoman noticed Emily sitting quietly near the wall and smiled dismissively. Did you find a pebble in the forest and decide it was royal property? Laughter followed. Emily simply lowered her eyes and remained silent. She had no interest in arguing. Hours passed. One by one, visitors were dismissed. The sun slowly disappeared beyond the palace windows. Then, just as Emily began wondering if she would need to return tomorrow, a royal attendant entered the chamber. He unfolded a parchment and read a single name. Emily Carter. The room fell quiet. Emily rose to her feet. The attendant looked directly at her. His Majesty has agreed to examine your claim personally. Follow me. Suddenly, every person in the chamber stopped laughing. Emily followed the royal attendant through a series of corridors lined with towering columns, polished marble floors, and enormous windows overlooking the snow-covered capital. Every step seemed to carry her farther from the life she knew. Servants moved quickly through the halls. Guards stood watch beside carved wooden doors. Everywhere she looked, wealth and power surrounded her. Yet despite the grandeur, Emily felt strangely calm. She was not here to seek a reward. She was only here to return something that never belonged to her. Eventually, the attendant stopped before a pair of massive doors decorated with the blackthorn crest. He turned toward her. His Majesty is inside. Emily nodded. Her heart beat slightly faster. The doors opened. Warm light spilled across the hallway. Inside stood a private council chamber far more intimate than she expected. A long wooden table occupied the center of the room. Several advisors stood nearby. At the far end, beside a large fireplace, stood Alpha King Ethan Blackthorn. Emily immediately understood why people spoke about him with such respect. He carried authority effortlessly. Tall and composed, dressed in dark formal clothing, he seemed less like a man and more like a force of nature. His silver eyes shifted toward her. For a brief moment, the room became completely silent. Ethan studied the young Omega standing before him. Her clothing was simple. Her posture was humble. Nothing about her suggested wealth or influence. Yet unlike many visitors he had met during the search, she appeared neither nervous nor eager to impress anyone. She simply looked honest. One advisor cleared his throat. This is Emily Carter, Your Majesty. Ethan nodded. You claim to have information about the missing pendant. Emily carefully reached into her satchel. Several advisors exchanged skeptical looks. Over the past 3 days, dozens of people had presented fake jewelry, hoping to claim the reward. Most lasted less than 30 seconds before being exposed. Emily unwrapped the cloth slowly and placed the pendant on the table. The effect was immediate. Ethan froze. The room seemed to stop breathing. Firelight reflected from the blue gemstone exactly as he remembered. Every detail, every mark, every engraving. It was real. One advisor whispered in disbelief. Another stared openly at the pendant. Ethan stepped forward without taking his eyes off it. His hand moved slowly across the table until his fingers touched the silver chain. The moment he lifted it, years of memories flooded back. His mother's smile, her voice, the day she placed the pendant around his neck and told him that true strength came from protecting others, not ruling them. Ethan lowered his head briefly. The room remained silent. Nobody dared interrupt. Finally, he looked toward Emily. Where did you find it? His voice sounded quieter than before. Emily explained everything. The forest, the snowdrift, the empty trail. She answered every question honestly and without embellishment. The more she spoke, the more confused the advisors became. Nothing about her story suggested greed. Nothing suggested manipulation. One elderly council member frowned. You knew about the reward? Emily nodded. Yes. And yet you still brought it directly here? Of course. Several people exchanged surprised glances. To Emily, the answer felt obvious. To everyone else in the room, it sounded extraordinary. Ethan watched her carefully. Most people would have sold the pendant. Most people would have negotiated for more money. Most people would have tried to benefit from finding something so valuable. Emily had done none of those things. As silence settled once again over the chamber, Ethan found himself wondering who this forgotten Omega truly was. And for the first time since the pendant disappeared, something other than loss occupied his thoughts. The council chamber remained unusually quiet after Emily finished speaking. Advisors who normally questioned every detail found themselves with nothing to challenge. Her story was simple, consistent, honest. Ethan still held the pendant in his hand, as though letting go might cause it to disappear again. Firelight danced across the blue gemstone, while memories continued surfacing from years long past. Finally, one of the younger council members broke the silence. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should proceed with the reward." Several advisors nodded immediately. The reward had already been announced throughout the kingdom. Everyone expected the matter to end with a payment and a formal thank you. Ethan slowly looked up. "Of course." He turned toward Emily. "The reward is yours." Emily blinked. Then she offered a small smile. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The answer seemed normal enough until Ethan noticed something unusual. There was no excitement in her voice. No relief. No triumph. Only polite gratitude. Curious, he studied her more carefully. "May I ask something?" Emily nodded. "When you discovered the pendant and later learned about the reward, why did you not sell it?" Several advisors leaned forward. They wanted to hear this answer as well. Emily thought for a moment. "Because it was not mine." The simplicity of her response caused several people to exchange glances. Ethan waited for more. "There was none." "That is all?" he asked. Emily looked slightly confused. Should there be another reason? A few council members looked embarrassed. Somehow the question exposed more about them than it did about her. Ethan felt the corner of his mouth lift slightly. It was the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in days. One elderly advisor cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, do you understand how valuable that pendant is?" "Yes." "And you never considered keeping it?" Emily shook her head. Someone was looking for it. The room fell silent again. Ethan looked down at the pendant, then back at Emily. He suddenly remembered his mother's favorite lesson. Character is revealed by what people do when nobody is watching. Emily found the pendant alone. No witnesses. No expectations. No pressure. She could have walked away. Instead, she traveled across the kingdom to return it. The realization lingered in Ethan's mind. Most people spent years trying to impress him. This Omega had done so without even trying. Meanwhile, outside the chamber, word had already begun spreading through the palace. Servants whispered in hallways. Guards exchanged rumors. The mysterious visitor had actually found the pendant. Curiosity spread quickly. Back inside, Ethan placed the pendant carefully around his neck. For the first time in days, something within him felt whole again. He looked at Emily. "Where do you live?" "A small village near Pine Hollow Forest." Ethan recognized the location immediately. Remote. Modest. Far from the center of pack life. "And what do you do there?" "Whatever people need help with." Several advisors frowned in confusion. Emily noticed and clarified. "I gather herbs. Deliver medicine. Help elderly neighbors. Small things. Small things." Ethan found himself thinking that those small things seemed to define her entire life. Not status. Not recognition. Service. Before anyone could continue the conversation, another advisor entered the chamber carrying several documents. "Your Majesty, preparations for tomorrow's winter gathering are complete." Ethan nodded absent-mindedly. Then a thought occurred to him. A very unexpected thought. His gaze shifted back toward Emily. Outside, hundreds of pack members would attend the gathering. Leaders from neighboring territories would be present. The entire kingdom would be watching. And suddenly, Ethan knew exactly what he intended to do next. The decision formed so quickly that even he was surprised by it. Across the room, Emily remained completely unaware that her ordinary life was about to change in a way no one in the kingdom would ever forget. The next morning, Blackthorn Palace buzzed with anticipation. The annual winter gathering was one of the most important events of the year. Representatives from neighboring packs arrived before sunrise. Merchants filled the outer courtyards. Nobles, advisors, warriors, and respected elders gathered beneath banners that stretched across the grand hall. Hundreds of guests filled the palace grounds. Emily had planned to leave long before any of it began. She collected her satchel and prepared for the journey home. The reward had already been arranged. The pendant had been returned. Her part in the story was finished. Or so she believed. A knock sounded at her guest chamber door. Emily opened it to find a palace attendant standing outside. "Miss Carter, His Majesty requests your presence at today's gathering." Emily blinked. There must be some mistake. "There is no mistake." The attendant smiled politely. "His Majesty specifically requested you." Confusion followed her all the way to the Grand Hall. As she entered, countless conversations filled the air. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across polished floors. Noble families occupied reserved seating near the front. Advisors stood beside the royal platform. Emily immediately felt out of place. Several guests noticed her simple clothing and exchanged curious looks. She quietly moved toward the back of the room, hoping to remain unnoticed. Unfortunately, that proved impossible. Whispered conversations followed her arrival. "Who is she? Why is an Omega from the villages here? Perhaps she works for the palace." Emily lowered her eyes and ignored the attention. Moments later, trumpets echoed throughout the hall. Every conversation stopped instantly. Alpha King Ethan Blackthorn entered. The crowd rose to their feet. Ethan crossed the hall with calm confidence before taking his place near the royal platform. Formal announcements began. Advisors presented reports. Visiting leaders exchanged greetings. Everything proceeded exactly as expected. Then Ethan stood. Silence immediately followed. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. "Before we conclude today's gathering," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "there is someone I would like you all to meet." Curious murmurs spread through the crowd. Ethan's gaze moved across the room until it found Emily. Miss Emily Carter. Her heart nearly stopped. The entire hall turned toward her. Emily froze. Surely there had been some misunderstanding. Ethan gestured toward the front. "Please join me." The walk across the hall felt endless. Every eye followed her. Some guests appeared confused, others openly skeptical. Emily could practically hear the questions forming in their minds. Why her? What could possibly make this Omega important enough to stand beside the Alpha King? When she finally reached the platform, Ethan addressed the crowd once more. He held up the pendant. Sunlight from the tall windows reflected from the blue gemstone. Immediate recognition spread through the hall. Everyone knew the story. Everyone knew the kingdom had been searching for it. 3 days ago, Ethan said, this pendant was lost. The room remained completely silent. Many searched for it. Many hoped to find it. He paused. One person actually did. Emily felt every eye settle on her. Ethan continued. She found something priceless. She knew its value. She knew about the reward. And despite every reason to keep it, she returned it simply because it was the right thing to do. The hall grew quieter with every word. Ethan looked directly at Emily. Integrity is rare. Kindness is rare. Character is rare. His voice carried unexpected warmth. And those qualities deserve recognition. Around the room, expressions slowly changed. Confusion became surprise. Surprise became respect. Emily stood motionless, completely unprepared for what was happening. Then Ethan took one step forward. The movement alone caused several advisors to exchange startled looks. Because the Alpha King was not finished, the Grand Hall remained completely silent. Hundreds of guests watched as Ethan Blackthorn stepped away from the royal platform. The movement alone seemed to confuse everyone present. Alpha Kings did not leave their position during formal gatherings. They certainly did not do so for ordinary visitors. Yet Ethan continued forward until he stood directly before Emily Carter. For a moment, neither spoke. Emily could feel the attention of every person in the hall resting upon her shoulders. She wished she could disappear into the crowd. Instead, she stood frozen beside the most powerful man in the kingdom. Ethan turned toward the assembled guests. Many people measure value through wealth. His voice echoed gently throughout the hall. Others measure value through status, titles, or influence. He glanced toward Emily. I have spent years surrounded by those things. The room remained silent. No one dared interrupt. Ethan continued. Yet a few days ago, an Omega with no title, no authority, and no expectation of recognition demonstrated something far more valuable. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. They could already sense where the speech was heading. She found something priceless when no one was watching. She could have kept it. She could have sold it. She could have chosen herself. His gaze settled on Emily once again. Instead, she chose what was right. Murmurs spread quietly through the audience. Ethan raised one hand, and silence immediately returned. Then came the moment no one expected. "Emily Carter," he said clearly. "On behalf of Blackthorn Pack, I thank you." The words seemed simple, yet hearing them spoken publicly by the Alpha King stunned the hall. Emily's eyes widened. She had expected a reward, perhaps a polite acknowledgement. Nothing more. Ethan was not finished. He turned toward one of his advisors. "Bring the registry." Shock crossed several faces instantly. The registry was not used for ordinary matters. A royal attendant hurried forward carrying an ornate book bound in dark leather. Ethan accepted it. Then he addressed the crowd once more. "From this day forward, Emily Carter will be recognized as an honored citizen of Blackthorn territory." Audible gasps spread throughout the hall. Even neighboring pack leaders exchanged surprised looks. The title was rarely granted. It carried privileges normally reserved for respected leaders, scholars, and individuals who performed extraordinary service to the kingdom. Emily looked completely speechless. The noblewoman who had mocked her the previous day stared in disbelief. Several advisors appeared equally shocked. Ethan signed the registry before handing it to Emily. "You earned this." For a second, she could not move. Then she accepted the document carefully. "Your Majesty," her voice barely emerged above a whisper. "I only returned what belonged to you." Ethan smiled faintly. "Exactly." Laughter rippled softly through parts of the audience. The tension eased, yet the admiration growing throughout the hall remained. People looked at Emily differently now, not because she had become powerful, because they finally saw who she already was. As the ceremony concluded, conversations exploded throughout the room. Everywhere people discussed the same thing. The Omega from Pine Hollow. The girl who returned the pendant. The girl personally honored by the Alpha King. Emily felt overwhelmed by the attention. All she wanted was to return home. Yet as she prepared to leave, Ethan called her name once more. She turned. His expression had become thoughtful, almost curious. "Before you go," he said, "there is something I would like to ask you." Emily paused. Something in his tone felt different from before. Less formal, more personal. And for reasons she could not explain, she suddenly had the feeling that returning the pendant was only the beginning of a much larger story. The gathering ended hours later, but Emily Carter remained the center of countless conversations. Everywhere she walked, people recognized her. Some offered congratulations. Others simply stared. The attention felt strange. Only 2 days earlier, most of these people would have walked past her without noticing. Now they spoke her name as though she had always mattered. Emily found the experience exhausting. She preferred quiet forests and small villages to crowded halls and royal ceremonies. As evening approached, she finally stepped outside into the palace gardens. Fresh snow covered the pathways while lanterns cast warm golden light across the winter landscape. For the first time all day, she felt able to breathe normally. "I thought I might find you here." Emily turned. Ethan Blackthorn approached along the stone path. Without the formal atmosphere of the gathering surrounding him, he seemed different somehow. Less distant. More human. Emily smiled politely. "I was looking for somewhere quiet." Ethan glanced toward the palace. "That rules out most of the building." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound surprised both of them. For a brief moment, the conversation felt easy, natural. Ethan looked toward the snow-covered gardens. "There is something I wanted to ask you earlier." Emily nodded. "What is it?" He hesitated. The question sounded simple enough in his mind. Yet now that the moment had arrived, he found himself choosing his words carefully. "Why do you spend so much time helping people?" Emily blinked. Of all the questions she expected, that was not one of them. "Because they need help." Ethan smiled slightly. Most people would give a more complicated answer. Emily considered this. Maybe it is complicated for them. The response lingered between them. Ethan found himself studying her again. Not because she was extraordinary in the way nobles admired. Not because she sought recognition. Quite the opposite. She seemed completely unaware of how unusual she was. Earlier that afternoon, several palace staff members shared stories about her. The elderly healers she regularly assisted. The struggling families she quietly supported. The neighbors she helped without ever asking for payment. None of those stories came from Emily herself. She never mentioned them. That fact impressed Ethan more than the stories did. "You know," he said quietly, "I asked some questions after our meeting yesterday." Emily looked confused. "About me?" Ethan nodded. The answers were interesting. She immediately looked uncomfortable. "I hope nobody exaggerated." The concern in her voice made him laugh softly. Most people worried they had not been praised enough. Emily worried the opposite. Snow drifted gently around them as silence settled for a moment. Then Ethan reached into his coat and removed a small velvet box. Emily stared at it in surprise. "Your Majesty?" Ethan handed it to her. "Open it." Slowly she did. Inside rested a silver emblem bearing the blackthorn crest. Not a decoration, not jewelry. An official symbol of service recognized throughout the kingdom. Emily's eyes widened. "I cannot accept this." "Yes, you can." "Why?" Ethan looked directly at her. His silver eyes reflected the lantern light. "Because people should know who you are." The words struck her harder than expected. For years, Emily had lived quietly, unnoticed, invisible to most of the pack. Yet standing here now, she realized something had changed. Not because she returned a pendant, not because she received a title, but because someone had finally recognized the qualities she never believed anyone saw. As she looked up, she found Ethan watching her with an expression she could not quite understand. And for the first time, both of them sensed that fate might have plans reaching far beyond a lost pendant. 3 days later, Emily Carter finally began the journey home. Snow still covered the countryside, but the storm clouds had passed, leaving bright winter sunlight stretching across the landscape. A small carriage provided by the palace carried her toward Pine Hollow Forest. Beside her rested the registry document, the silver service emblem, and enough reward money to improve her life in ways she never imagined. Yet those gifts were not what occupied her thoughts. Again and again, she found herself remembering a conversation in a lantern-lit garden. The way Ethan had spoken, the sincerity in his voice, the strange feeling that he saw her as a person rather than a title. Back at Blackthorn Palace, Ethan stood near the same window where he often reviewed reports and royal matters. Yet today the documents remained untouched. His thoughts had drifted elsewhere. One advisor eventually noticed. "Your Majesty, you seem distracted." Ethan glanced toward the snowy horizon. "Do I?" The advisor smiled knowingly. "The entire kingdom is discussing your speech." Ethan laughed softly. "I expected that." "No, Your Majesty. They are discussing her." Silence followed. Ethan looked out the window again. That was exactly the point. For too long, people overlooked individuals like Emily. They measured worth through power and status while ignoring character. Perhaps this time something different would happen. Meanwhile, Emily's return to Pine Hollow created almost as much excitement as the gathering itself. Villagers gathered near the road as the carriage arrived. Children ran alongside it. Elderly neighbors waved from porches. Everyone wanted to hear the story. Everyone wanted to know what happened inside the palace. Emily quickly discovered that remaining unnoticed was no longer possible. Yet despite the attention, nothing important about her changed. The next morning, she delivered medicine to an elderly widow. The day after that, she helped repair a damaged fence. By the end of the week, she was once again collecting herbs in the forest. The title mattered. The recognition mattered. But kindness remained part of who she was. Several weeks passed. Winter slowly began giving way to early signs of spring. Then one afternoon, a familiar rider appeared at the edge of the village. Word spread immediately. By sunset, nearly everyone knew the news. The Alpha King had arrived. Ethan traveled without a large escort this time. No ceremony. No royal announcements. Just a single rider following a forest road toward a small village. When he reached Emily's cottage, he found her kneeling beside a garden bed preparing for spring planting. She looked up in surprise. "Your Majesty." Ethan smiled. "I thought we agreed that title makes conversations difficult." Emily laughed softly. "Then what should I call you?" "Ethan works." For a moment, neither spoke. The simplicity of the exchange felt strangely comforting. Around them, sunlight filtered through pine trees while the last traces of winter melted into the earth. Ethan looked toward the village. Children played nearby. Neighbors greeted one another. Life moved peacefully around them. "You built something good here," he said. Emily followed his gaze. "It is home." Ethan nodded slowly. "I can see why." The silence that followed felt easy, comfortable. Neither rushed to fill it. Eventually, Emily smiled. "So what brings the Alpha King all the way to Pine Hollow?" Ethan looked directly at her. His silver eyes reflected the golden afternoon light. "I wanted to return something." Emily blinked. "What?" A faint smile appeared on his face. "The favor." Confusion quickly turned into laughter. And as the sound echoed through the village, Neither of them noticed several curious neighbors smiling from nearby windows. Sometimes destiny arrived with thunder and ceremony. Sometimes it arrived through a lost pendant, a simple act of kindness, and two people who finally saw each other clearly. And in the seasons that followed, the entire pack would discover that the most remarkable stories often begin with the smallest choices.